So I think with painting your Kataphron breachers, the important thing is to divide up your parts into different segments so they're easier to paint. These guys are going to be all silver. These guys are going to have red on them. These parts are easier to paint on stands. These armor panels, of course, are going to be red. These are going to be red as well. And the body's going to have some tan on it. We're not going to do a tan on the inside of the wheel well here, just because it is ridiculously complex, especially because this has to be red. It's easier just to go in and dump all your silver into this area and wash it out. We would do that on a high level model. This is mid-level for a tabletop Mars scheme or a custom scheme that somebody had, but for this one we're gonna stick with just a little bit of tan on the front for that kind of iconic look for these guys. So I have a mix of this Terran khaki 50/50 thinner in my airbrush, ready to go. Grab my part here, and then I'm just going to shoot this front area with my tan. Now I'll go online and check, see if the back area has any tan to it, but I don't believe so. I think it's just red. I'm just shooting the areas that need this color on here, and then we're gonna mask this spot off. I'm gonna fade it to the back here. I might just shoot this too, and we'll mask that off. A little bit of an overspray there. Anytime your paint kind of runs like that, just immediately stop. Let it dry for a second. Turn off your compressor. I'm just looking for any of those spots with a little bit of black showing through and getting them coated. So I won't force you to watch that. Get the picture, light coats, don't force it to cover. Take your time, you're saving time anyway. So this needs to dry because we're going to put a liquid mask on it. Once it's dry, hit it with a matte varnish. You only need to hit it in the areas where you're going to actually put the liquid mask on. In the meantime, we're going to take our guns, the parts that need to be silver, and we're going to put an airbrush coat of the metal color on there. Metal color chrome. So just to show you guys how nice this chrome coats through the airbrush, I'm going to have to go down here so I don't spray everything on my desk. Flows out of the airbrush super nice. And see how lustrous that silver is. For safety's sake and not to rush a project, I'm going to let this varnish cure overnight or toward the end of the day before we put our liquid mask on. The liquid mask is going to take a while to dry as well because put it on very thick. The thicker you put on liquid mask, the easier it is to get off your model. So in the meantime, we're going to work on the other parts like these guys, adding our white ink. Got my white ink loaded up in my airbrush. I like the Bombay India ink, flows real nice. It dries pretty matte, like barely satin through the airbrush. We're going for an extreme highlight on these guys, so instead of a natural highlight from the top, we're going to be spraying the bottom. And we build up slowly, aiming at the bottom of the plate. Working up. We want to make sure we get a really, really nice saturated white at the bottom of the object, because that red isn't going to kick. Not going to be vibrant unless we get that white knocked in there nice and solid. Now the top of this ring, I'm going to aim a little bit from the back just to hit the top of this ring, so we'll have a nice highlight here, and then add a little bit of highlight along these edges so they're not just ignored on the model. These little plates here, looking at my reference instructions. So the fleur-de-lis looks like it come from the bottom or from the top. That's stupid. So we're gonna imagine these are coming from the bottom. So this side, okay, the long side. This side's gonna be where we want our bright highlight, and I'm just gonna double check that. Always double check your work. Yeah, the small curve is the bottom side. Again, for an extreme highlight, we go for the bottom side. If you guys have seen the Dune Crawler video, you'll know that the leg plates in that, they were highlighted from the bottom up. So we're following that scheme for this entire Mars Admech section. We have a couple of Admech armies in right now that we're working on. So it's good to be able to give you guys an opportunity to see how we do that. So we got that nice vibrant white on that piece. We got some panels, things on the arms and such, highlight the bottom of this. The torso and the backpack look like they have two parts that are going to be red. Go ahead and highlight everything. Go back. You can do what you feel looks nice, and in the end you won't be hurting. Just be consistent. Now I'm breaking the planes here using the object so I get little separations of color. My red will be vibrant here on this corner and then brighter down at the bottom of this, and that'll look cool. Gotta get it on the inside of this arm too, so switch up and spray. Make your camera focus. It's not happening. Alright, I think you guys get the idea. I'm gonna go ahead and white all these out, and then I'll let you see what the results are. So it's time for our contrast red. We've got our white on here. The claws and things, those can be red as well. So if they're going to be red, paint them white. This little guy's got his shock claws and stuff. They can be silver if you want them to. From looking at reference online, it's kind of a toss-up. These guys have a lot of plates and things that could naturally be silver, but we're going to paint them up red just to give a little more variance and to hit that sort of mid-level stride. I've got my contrast Blood Angels red loaded up in my airbrush, not diluted at all, pure contrast red, and going to get that on our areas that we've sprayed our white on. Again, take it slow, let it build up on its own. No reason to take all that hard work of fading on your white and obliterate it in one overspray. We're just getting on that nice silky smooth fade. You might be able to hear, but my finger in the short tiny little pulls. Squirt, 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 spray, spray, spray. And then letting air in between those sprays dry the pigment that I've applied. That air is another tool that helps you use the airbrush. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this red to all of our parts. Next step is to add yellow ink. We add the yellow to give that red punch. We want to warm it up. So I've got yellow in my airbrush here. Got my pressure way too high. And we're going to layer this over our red just to warm it up, make it more hot rod. This will also help knock out any sort of whites that are left behind if you're having issues with getting parts where you inadvertently leave a little part that has some white on it. It'll knock that, and if I can show you here, it'll knock that white down to orange. That way you get a still a warm spot that almost looks like a highlight. This way you can see all the parts after they've been Where's the camera focus on this thing? Alright, gonna finish up all these parts with the yellow, and then we'll move on to a wash. So we're gonna take our non-oil wash on our 2 parts that we painted with our chrome silver. It's nice and dry now. It's not tacky. It's still tacky when you touch it. Be careful, because it can reactivate that silver pigment pretty quick, and then you just end up with like a soupy black gunmetal instead. If that's what you're going for, it's fine, but you don't want to. I'm going to kind of avoid these coils. I already put some in on that side because I want to dry off my brush and just soak it out. I'm going to go back and add white there because our color scheme for these are yellow sort of heat lamps. Yellowy red. I'm making sure that I'm getting all these little depressions in the cylinder there filled in, going a little bit heavier with the wash. And you can go heavy with wash and just push it around on the object. You don't have to worry about painting it on. Make sure your brush is loaded and just move it around on the object. Usually when I'm washing something, you can see I have a pretty big brush. I'm not using the liner because I'm not really doing accurate washing. I'm just doing bulk washing. You see how much wash is on my brush? I just go ahead and slather it on there and then move it around the model. Especially if the whole part's just silver, I don't have to be careful about it. I can just slather this stuff on and make sure I'm getting my cracks and crevices shadowed. And just loading the brush dangerously directly out of the pot, not adding it to the palette. And pushing it and moving it around. And see, if I went and dried my brush off, I could soak all this up right now. It's all active, it's all ready to go. Adding a little bit to areas where I see any sort of lack of wash. Happy with that. I'll set it aside, let it dry. After that, we're moving on to adding our silvers by hand to the figure. So I'm going to take my silver RLM here, this model air color, brush coats super easily. I'm going to take one of my older Series 7s. So I have a new one here. I don't want to use this because it's still got a nice fine point. So I'll take one that's a little bit older, point's a little bit more rounded. And then this stuff, let's see, this part will be silver here. So I'm going to brush it on. You see how easy that coats? It's just one little easy brush stroke. Now this part takes forever, so I'll be back in a little bit. We got our silvers on. This step takes a little bit. There's a lot of little pieces and things that these guys have on the torso. It's kind of hard to make decisions about what is going to be silver, what's going to be black, and what's going to be gold. But just doing kind of a slow pan so you guys can see which pieces I decided to make silver. Now with things like your hoses and that, the little brackets, don't worry about going over. We're gonna paint that black, so if you're going over it with another color, it's your time to be kind of quick and dirty with stuff. Still working on the or still waiting for this to dry, so this is going to be its own project tomorrow to finish up. And then of course this is going to have the gold on it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the non-oil wash on all the silver parts, and then we'll address whatever is going to be gold. For our black wash, we are going to pin wash or line wash or detail control, whatever you want to call it. These little areas here hit around objects that have 90 degrees. That way it'll pick out those details even more, make them pop out. We'll do that before we add highlight. That way anything that gets too dark, we can go back and we can highlight. So that is in addition to kind of the broad wash that we do, different types of full wash on these parts here. We can hit the bolts too. Maybe a few of them. And then a little 90 degrees like that. So do that along with or at the same time you're washing your silver parts. Now if you know something's going to be black or dark later on, like sort of the inside of these hoses, and you're already washing in here, it's kind of hard to get to, you can go ahead and slather some black down in there. That'll make it easier to go in and paint your black. You'll have to hit less areas and you'll have less chance of hitting any of your red bits and have to do more touch-ups. Next step is to take our liquid gold. This is rich gold. Open this sucker up. They get hard to open after they sit for a little while. I painted out the cap with these. I've flipped over my fair share of bottles trying to dip the brush into the actual pigment. This is going to be this little cog here. It's going to be gold. I still have some wet wash, so I'm just going to avoid that for the sake of demonstrating this gold and how nicely it coats. This guy, you can see all the areas that we washed. Want to get those shoulder pad details on. Slow and steady when you're doing these detailed areas. It's key. And up here we can be a little more aggressive, just slightly. But this stuff is really a go-to for gold, because with any other type of acrylic gold you're going to have to do several coats just because of the way the pigment coats. This stuff, though a little bit of a pain to work with, is much easier than using your acrylic gold. So I'm going to finish out all these little trim areas on this guy and we'll be back. After we get our gold on, it's time for our Reichland flesh shade to richen up that gold. I'm going to take my liner and not put enough wash on it. So really, I kind of wanted to build up so I can move it around the surface so I get that nice red tone from the Reichland flesh shade. And really for these flat areas, kind of brush it on, let it build up around the bolts. Push it. These cracks are visible on the model, so I'm making sure to get some wash down there. Just drag my brush across the surface. We're going to dry brush these once that shade dries. And we have a lot of parts to add the shade to and go through them so you can see how, where, and what I painted gold. So these side panels didn't get anything gold. These arms, we got the trim on those. So there's two arms, two different. You got the grabby claw and you got your shocky claw. Just the cog on the back of the backpack. A lot on this guy. You got the cog and all the trim around the armor panels. Then this gun, which once we get the shade and dry brush this one will be done. It always feels good to finish some objects. And then this one, the plate that the ray sits on, sort of to mimic what we did with the troops. I'm going to use the silver to dry brush our gold areas once our wash is dry. It dries pretty quick. So for these guys, kind of go in and use the side of the brush just to hit high points and get a little rougher when you're not close to the red. You can see that highlight popping out those edges a little more. We're going to do that to all our parts. And then parts with silver areas, we're going to hit those with a little bit of dry brush as well. So if we want something to be brighter, I believe this is the top of the gun over here because this is where this hooks in. just going to go over the whole thing, brighten up any sort of pooling that you might have. With the newer washes, it's not as much of a problem with like surface pooling, but if you want to knock any of that out, just dry brush over it. It makes it look natural. After you get your dry brush silver done, it's time to do some edge highlighting. Take your Kadar red base and your Kadar red highlight, about 50-50 mix. And use that to highlight your edges. So I use a good brush for this. I like having a decent brush. I use my Series 7 size 0. Get a fairly bright highlight, and let's show you where made a little boo-boo. I got some gold up on here. So I'm going to use this edge highlight as an opportunity to sort of clean that back up. And then I have one over here as well, because I was moving fast on this piece. And then once you clean up your boo-boos, go in and edge highlight all the little red edges. A lot of edges on this guy. This guy has more detail than a dune crawler. Some parts might not have edges to highlight, so I like to go in and add some. These pulling from the dark area, since this will be the top area. See if I can get it on camera there, and then pull. Might have to adjust that one a little bit. And pull. Always pulling the brush toward yourself to get that edge in there, and then I'll do a little top highlight as well. So with that step, we've finished up some of the parts, these side plates and the little knee pads, track pads. Some of them are getting pretty close, so we just need to do the blue on those little engine areas, but now we got another decently long step of adding the black to all the cabling and then going back and highlighting that. So for that, I'm going to use the Pro Acryl Coal Black and get that on all the hosing and pipe work that are on these models. It's been a day. It's time for our liquid mask. I like to put mine on heavy. Use a really old cheap brush and just work quickly. Because if you don't work quickly, you'll start pulling dried latex and it'll start unmasking itself as you're masking it. Build it up. Don't worry about how it looks. You're not caring about that. You're worried about what it's covering. Because what it's covering won't get painted. And we'll do all our airbrushing. I'm just going to mask this one part here. It's okay to get a little bit of whatever is next to it. Those can always be touched up. We're just trying to save a little bit of bulk time here. But I'm going to finish this up. See you on the next step. So we got our mask on while we're waiting for that to dry. A little bit of it's already dried already. We're going to highlight all our tubes and the black cloth areas. I still have to finish some of these areas, get them in, but I'm going to go ahead and illustrate that real quick. I left yesterday while those were in process. I need to finish them up. So I got my black and I got my basically Space Wolves-ish blue. And I'm going to take some of this black and mix it to a dark blue. And then come in and lightly highlight the tubes with ridges to sort of pick up those high points. And then any of these straight tubes, just hit the top edge and run them down just to get a little bit of highlight color in there. This wire, of course, is going to need to be black. That one as well. We got some here on the side, on the back side, that we can hit. Just add that contrasting dark blue highlight on those tubes. A lot of those to do, and once we get those finished up, we'll move on. So masking is fully dry. I just want to go in. There's a few areas, like this guy's going to be red. Just want to make sure I remove some of that masking material, or well, all of the masking material on the parts that I don't want it to be on. There's a little bit on the treads here, and I'll scrape those areas off. Make sure it's clean before we go in and we spray our red. Once I get that masking peeled wherever it shouldn't be, I'm going to go back with a little bit of my Vallejo black primer and just can I get this thing to focus? There we go. And it automatically focuses back. Alright. Sorry for fighting with my camera. It's a turd. So I'm only really blacking out the areas that are going to be red. So I'm not worried about tank treads. I'm going to paint over all that stuff. So here's the figure with the white on here. I'm repeating a lot of steps that we went over on the body. If there's anything new, I will stop and let you see it. Of course, I'm going to pause so you guys can see the peeling, because that's always satisfying. So I'm going to start removing the masking now. I've let it sit for probably longer than I should have. So I need to find areas that are like more built up to get a hold of and start peeling off. It's going to be a little bit more attached since it has sat for a little bit. I'm going to peel all this off there and then show you guys the result. This is a real satisfying bit here. Yeah, peel that off. So I maintained all my tan under there. Got all our masking removed, and I'm going to move on to the next step. You can still see a little bit of the varnish shining through here, but I'm going to go through and do all the metallics again, which is a fairly long step, and I'll just show you which parts I did metallic. We've got all the steps done on the body of the destroyer here, or breacher. I think this one's a breacher. So now we're going to weather up the front, this tan area. For that, I'm going to take a little bit of this sponge here and tear it up. Kind of a little workable piece. This will be our randomization. Dip it in your black and just like a dry brush, kind of wipe off the excess, and then it'll catch the high points. Here you see like little black marks there. Just to add some paint chips, kind of tap it in the middle, a little bit here and there, and then when we edge highlight, it'll make them look like little holes that have been knocked into the armor. Next step is to take our Terran khaki and a little bit of white to add a highlight or an edge highlight for our khaki area at the front of that model breacher. Gotta pin this paint. Don't need a whole lot. Just get it about half a shade brighter. And then go in under your damage here. Sort of kind of stipple in your edge highlight. You don't want them to be even. You want them to look rough. Kind of like how the black is rough. You want to have a highlight that's rough to simulate different levels of paint being chipped off. And then your normal edges, just get a normal edge highlight on, and that'll start to bring out your battle damage. I've gone in and painted our accent colors. Some of the areas just designated as being like energy cells and that. I'm going to take some of the blue game wash, and I'm just going to darken these up so we can bring them back up. The wash will just settle down into the cracks and crevices here of the little power cell energy canisters. And then once that dries, we can highlight them up. Done the same color for lenses too. So the head of the guy has 3 little lenses right there. And I'm going to hit those with a wash, and then the top of the little gun mount. While my wash is drying for prep of the energy effect that we're going to put on this gun, I'm going to go ahead and paint the coils white because we're going to use a yellow ink on there. And we want to make sure that that yellow is nice and bright. The yellow ink will flow into the coils, give it a little bit of a darker effect on the inside and lighter on the tops of the coils, but still be a fairly strong tone. You can use a contrast for this if you want. I just enjoy the way the inks work. And maybe 1 to 2 coats of white, depending on what white you're using. This is the Vallejo Arctic White, which seems to have a little bit better coverage than the Vallejo Dead White. So, whichever one you're more comfortable with. Your wash should be dry at this point, so take some of your blue, quick highlight up on the tops of these areas, maybe down the side of one of the more visible spots. Same for over here, just on the top side. We're going to mix a little bit of white as a step up. Come in, just sort of a crescent shape here on the top of this. A little line down the side. Same here with these guys, a little bit of a crescent shape. Not really looking for a lens effect on these guys, more of a highlight. And you can go back in and get your little white dot, maybe 2. Just for those little power cells and this little glass thing, we'll add a white dot here. And then shift around and do thinner line down the center there, or right next to, just for a highlight. And we'll go in and highlight our things that way. The lenses for those usually just do that step up kind of swoosh at the bottom, our little crescent moon here. And then little dot highlight. Give that lens effect. So I got our 3 lenses now. So this guy has a little bit of flesh showing his face here. We're going to take a little bit of the blue and the dark flesh and mix up kind of a deadish skin tone here. So it's about 50-50. See it over here in the corner here, and that'll be our base coat. That's kind of the Space Wolves-ish gray that we've been using to mix with our black to highlight. So go in here, and then we're going to drop a Reichland or a Gilliman. I'll make a choice here in a minute, but just get that base coat on and we'll move on. We're going to take a little bit of this Gilliman flesh and mix it with our blue wash. So just to give it a little bit more of a ruddy look. Dead servitor-ish look. Yeah. Knock in some shadows. I'll put it on heavy, and I'll come back and siphon it off with a brush. Just move it around the model so we don't get any streaks. You see how it's pooled up there? Take it. Just use my brush and pull that wash out until it's at the level that I want it. And that right there is almost a good skin tone in and of itself. But we're going to go in and add some highlights and paint an eyeball. While our wash is drying on that skin, I'm going to take the yellow ink, add that to this little energy weapon here. And again, just kind of slosh it on nice and heavy. Get a nice opaque color. And then for an edge highlight and for a top highlight, just take my finger, run it along. You see how it brings out the white there. Cool. So now we got our little highlights there. Wait for this to dry and we'll add a red ink. Now we're going to add highlights to our flesh tone. So we have it still mixed on our palette over here. Come up just a little bit. Don't want to be super drastic. It's still kind of a ruddy dead guy. Add our highlights. It's got a little stud in his head, so we'll probably go back and paint that silver. And then I get the cheekbone here. And then I'm going to go in and get the other side of the eyelid. Just to give him some more definition. Probably leave the back side of the head dark and just focus on the front. I'm going to add a little bit more warmth to just a few spots. Especially right under this eye. There. I'll go in and paint the eyeball. Let's see if I can do that on camera in a weird position. The white in there pretty good. Take a little bit of black, pretty thin black. Same brush. Go for the middle there. Now I can actually see. I'm going to start assembling pieces now, and it's important to remember to scrape away any sort of paint that you have, or at least rough up the areas where you're going to join parts so that your glue will connect those parts, especially if you're using plastic glue. If you use CA glue, there's a chance you can stick, but the paint will come away a lot easier than the glue will, so it's always best practice to just scrape away that paint. My yellow ink is dry. I'm going to add some red ink here, thin it down a little bit, add them to the bottom here. Streak it.
I see one switch jacket on top of the black marks.
Can thin it while it's on here. And then just kind of use the brush to push it around.
Alright, it's close enough. Oh.
And then do a wipe here. Just for our energy effect. So some of you guys have been asking about magnetization for these models. So I have parts that haven't been magnetized yet because I was running pins through them. These arms here, I have a 1/16 drill bit, and I'm already going to use the hole here that's from the cast. And you see how slow I'm moving my drill bit? It's good to have a drill that has like trigger control or rotation control. A lot of the ones with rotation control won't go below like 500 RPM though. You can't get this like really slow turn. You might be able to get slow turn with like a foot pedal Dremel, but even I have trouble controlling those. Just can't get my feet to be as sensitive as my hands. And then I have a 1/32 N52 neodymium magnet that'll sit in these shallow armholes, And these thicker ones here, these are 1/16 by 1/8. Those are going to go, I think these are 1/8 in here. So there's a little seam or gap there. For those, you want to be really careful and be shallow. Don't press. Let the drill actually resist the drill and pull back as it's going in, or what will happen is the drill will dig and it'll split your part apart. And to make our drill center, I'm going to take an X-Acto, put it in the middle of this crack because this is our center point, and just lightly twist. And this will act like a little bit of a drill, and it will put a mark here where our drill bit will sit. So I'll find that with the tip, and again go real slow and let the drill do the work. Alright, it's going to take a minute because I want to be careful with it, but I'll be back and show you guys the finished model. So we got all our parts magnetized now, so we can interchange them on our guy, quick and easy. And then the arm mount here, see how he's sitting. I need to shore up this little magnet here. You can take, see how this guy's sticking out just a little bit. I had to push him further in. But the arm magnets are sitting real nice, and this guy is sitting real nice. So I'm going to make sure to shore up that one magnet, and then we can change out all our war gear. The next step is to get him on a base since he's finished, and I'll take just a graphite lead pencil and kind of trace around where he's going to sit. That way I don't put any sand there, so I can do just a glue. It looks like he's sinking into the sand a little bit. Going to war, whatever. To straighten out the magnet issue, I took a little bit of sandpaper and just sanded one side of the magnet. It has helped. It still wants to sit just a little bit, but you can see it's fairly straight there. That's a good way. You can sand magnets a little bit. They have a coating on them. As long as you're not, biting too deep into the coating, it's fine. Plus, we're going to varnish everything, so we're going to seal it again anyway. I've never had any issues with it. Now we have our marking of where our tank treads are. I'm going to take super glue and coat all around this, and then put our basing material on. Sand is on here and dry, so I'm going to take some of this black primer, spray the base, dry brush steps. I'm going to use, where'd it go? I'll show you guys those steps. Airbrushing the black on here. Trying to keep the paint off the plastic. Just getting a nice solid coat on the sand. Usually go pretty heavy. That's good. And then next will be dry brushing our blue-gray pale and our Arctic white on there. Got my dry brush out. Starting with our first color here. Loading up the brush. And then get to dry brushing. Now I'm working from the front of the base back, because that makes my color brighter at the front of the base. And again, I always wanting to be a little bit brighter toward the front of our bases just to draw attention. Make sure that the interest is toward the front of the model. And I got some white left over here from the other day. I'll load that up. Just brighten it up even more. Kind of in a semicircle. Now I'm going to take an X-Acto. I'm going to rough up this surface. Just take kind of the side of the blade and pull just to add these little striations into the plastic, and that'll help my glue pull it down. There's a lot of surface area here to glue to. So shouldn't need to pin anything. I've already scraped the plastic on the actual figure as well. We got the finished model for you now, just giving you kind of a slow turnaround to see how everything's painted. This will be your reference with what parts I painted, what colors. I'm gonna go to the top view, and a final look from the front. Just let me know if you got any questions.